Richard Harrington froze in the doorway. His wheelchair-bound daughter wasn't in her chair. She was clinging to the back of the maid's son, shrieking with laughter. The world's 87th richest man clenched his fists, torn between rage and disbelief. Why did she look happier with him than she ever did with her own father? And what Richard chose to do next would shatter his empire forever. But this story isn't what you think it is, because in the next minutes, you'll see a boardroom betrayal that will make your blood boil, a public stand that cost Richard $780 million in stock value overnight, and a moment in a hospital room that will break your heart. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now back to our story. To understand how we got here, how a man who built walls around everything he loved suddenly decided to tear them all down, we need to go back to where it all began. To a mansion where silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. But before I reveal what Richard did when he saw his daughter with the maid's son, you need to understand the 3 promises he made the day his wife died. The Harrington estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress, a Connecticut mansion with 18,000 square feet of marble floors, golden chandeliers, and silence so heavy it seemed to crush anyone who entered. Every surface gleamed, every object had its place, and every person had their role. For Richard Harrington, silence meant control, and control meant safety. At 53, Richard had the kind of power most men only dream about. His logistics company moved 37% of all consumer goods across North America. When Richard spoke, senators answered. When Richard invested, markets shifted. But power didn't come from nowhere. Richard built his empire with bloodied hands and a spine forged in poverty. My father arrived in this country with $7 and a suitcase, he once told a reporter. What the reporter didn't print was the rest. How his immigrant parents were spat on, called vermin. How they worked 16-hour days while neighbors vandalized their tiny apartment. Richard learned early that America offered 2 choices: be crushed or crush others. He chose the latter. By 30, he owned 3 companies. By 40, he controlled supply chains across 2 continents. By 50, he had everything except what mattered most, because at the heart of his empire was a different kind of fortress, a wing of the mansion where his daughter Charlotte lived, wrapped in caution, her wheelchair always within reach, her childhood locked in routines and restrictions. At 10 years old, Charlotte Harrington had never climbed a tree, never raced through sprinklers, never felt grass between her toes without someone hovering nearby, ready to catch her if she fell. The spinal condition wasn't fatal, but Richard treated it like it was. After losing his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, Charlotte was all he had left. And he protected her the only way he knew how, with walls. Your safety is everything, he told her each night. Promise me you'll be careful. And Charlotte would nod, those big eyes looking up at him, always agreeing, always obeying, until Elijah came. Miriam Jackson had worked as the Harringtons' head housekeeper for 7 years. Quiet, efficient, invisible. Exactly what Richard wanted from his staff. When her husband died unexpectedly, Richard didn't fire her for bringing her 10-year-old son to work during school breaks. He simply made it clear. The boy was to be silent, stay out of sight, and never, ever disturb Charlotte. Elijah was everything his mother wasn't. Where Miriam moved like a shadow, Elijah burst with energy. Where she spoke softly, he laughed loudly. Where she bent her head, he held his high. And on a Tuesday in April, when Richard was supposed to be 8,000 miles away, these two worlds collided. He'd returned without warning. The Singapore deal closed early, and for once, Richard wanted to surprise his daughter. He entered silently, hearing unfamiliar sounds from the main living room. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Charlotte's laughter. The kind he hadn't heard since before the diagnosis. And there she was, his fragile, protected daughter, on all fours, being carried around the room by Elijah Jackson. Her wheelchair sat abandoned by the window, her face flushed with joy. "Faster," she squealed, gripping his shoulders. "Hold on tight, princess," Elijah called back, completely unaware they were being watched. Richard's throat closed, his fists clenched. Every instinct screamed to rush in, to separate them, to protect what was his. But something stopped him. It was Charlotte's face. She wasn't fragile in that moment. She wasn't sick. She wasn't the girl in the wheelchair. She was alive, more alive than he'd seen her in years. And Elijah's face wasn't careless or mocking. It was steady, protective, responsible. Like he understood the precious cargo on his back was worth more than anything in this mansion. For a man who built his life on control, Richard felt it slipping away. And for the first time in decades, he didn't immediately try to grab it back. He stepped back into the hallway, unseen, his mind racing. What was happening in his house while he was gone? How long had this been going on? And why did his daughter look happier with the maid's son than she ever did with him? Drop your thoughts in the comments if you've ever witnessed something that completely changed how you saw someone you thought you knew. Because what Richard did next shocked everyone, including himself. But before we get there, let me tell you about the whispers that had already started spreading through the Harrington estate. Whispers that would soon turn into accusations that threatened to destroy everything Richard had built. SoulyStories. 3 days passed before Richard mentioned what he saw. 3 days of watching, observing how his household really operated when he wasn't looking. What he discovered shook the foundation of everything he thought he knew. The staff moved differently around Miriam. They smiled to her face, then rolled their eyes behind her back. They spoke about Elijah in hushed tones, words like, "that boy," and "knows his place," floating through service corridors. But most revealing was Charlotte. For years, Richard had seen his daughter through the lens of her condition. Fragile, dependent, needing protection. Now he saw something else entirely. A child starving for connection. "Mr. Harrington, do you have a moment?" The voice belonged to Victor Grant, Richard's closest neighbor and largest investor. They stood in Richard's study, bourbon in hand, discussing the upcoming board meeting. "I've noticed something concerning," Victor said, swirling his drink. "Your housekeeper's son seems quite familiar with Charlotte." Richard's grip tightened on his glass. Familiar? Several of the staff have mentioned it. The boy doesn't seem to understand boundaries. Victor leaned closer. "People talk, Richard. And in our position, talk becomes liability." There it was, the first direct attack, wrapped in concern. "What exactly are you suggesting, Victor?" Richard's voice remained perfectly calm, betraying none of the storm brewing inside. "I'm suggesting that appearances matter. Your company's stock is up 17% this quarter. The board is watching. Investors are watching." Victor placed his glass down with a soft clink. The maid's son carrying your daughter around like a playmate. It doesn't look right. Richard had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and cutthroat competitors. But this casual cruelty masked as friendly advice, hit differently. "Thank you for your concern," he said, showing Victor to the door. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Victor's words echoed, mixing with memories of his own childhood. The whispers when his family moved into a neighborhood not meant for them. The parents who wouldn't let their children play with that immigrant kid. By morning, the whispers had spread beyond Victor. Richard's assistant mentioned concerns about household management. His driver asked if he should keep an eye on the Jackson boy. Even his head of security suggested additional supervision when Elijah was on the property. A CEO's reputation was currency. One scandal, one rumor could cost millions. The easy choice would be clear. Separate the children, end the friendship, restore order. But when Richard passed Charlotte's room that afternoon, he heard something that stopped him cold. "They don't understand," Charlotte was saying, her voice drifting through the cracked door. "You're the only one who doesn't treat me like I'm broken." "Because you're not," Elijah replied simply. "My mom says people see what they expect to see. Dad only sees the wheelchair. Then we'll have to show him something different." Richard backed away, unseen. For the first time, he wondered, was he protecting Charlotte or imprisoning her? The question haunted him through his board meeting the next day. 12 men and women in tailored suits discussing supply chain efficiencies, while Richard's mind kept returning to his daughter's words. "Richard, your thoughts on the Singapore expansion?" He blinked, focusing on Diane Chen, his CFO. "Before we continue," he said instead, "I'd like to discuss something personal." The room shifted. Richard Harrington never discussed personal matters. "My daughter has shown remarkable improvement recently. Her doctors are surprised by her progress." Congratulations murmured around the table. "I credit this to a friendship she's developed with my housekeeper's son." Silence fell like a guillotine. "I've been advised this friendship might raise concerns." His eyes found Victor's across the table. "I'd like to hear those concerns directly." For 30 seconds, no one spoke. Then Victor cleared his throat. "Richard, we all care about Charlotte, but there are optics to consider. The boy is black," Richard finished. "Or is it that his mother cleans my house?" The tension thickened. "Both, frankly," said Victor, never one to back down. "You've built your reputation on control and excellence. This situation appears uncontrolled." 3 other board members nodded in agreement. "Your personal life affects shareholder confidence," added Thomas Reynolds, head of legal. "We've worked too hard to risk perception issues." Richard looked at each face around the table. These were people he'd trusted for years, people who'd helped build his empire, and not one, not a single one, questioned the underlying prejudice. "I see," he said finally. "Thank you for your honesty." That evening, Richard found Miriam folding laundry in the service wing. "Mrs. Jackson, may I speak with you?" Her face remained carefully neutral. "Of course, Mr. Harrington. I've seen Elijah with Charlotte." Miriam's hands stilled on a towel. "Sir, I can explain. I've told him to keep his distance, but—" "No," Richard interrupted. "That's not why I'm here." For the first time in 7 years, Richard Harrington really looked at Miriam Jackson. The careful way she held herself, the dignity in her posture despite the uniform, the exhaustion around her eyes. "How long has my daughter been happier with your son than with me?" The question hung between them, raw and honest. Miriam measured her words carefully. Elijah doesn't see limitations to sir. He just sees Charlotte. And what do you see, Mrs. Jackson, when you look at me and how I've raised my daughter? Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the employer-employee divide vanished. I see a father so afraid of losing what he has that he can't see what he's missing. The truth hit Richard like physical pain. He'd built walls to keep danger out, never realizing he'd locked joy away too. The board thinks your son is inappropriate around my daughter, he said bluntly. My neighbor, my staff, they've all expressed concerns. Fear flashed across Miriam's face. I understand. We'll pack our things tonight. No. Richard's voice was firm. That's not what I'm saying. Have you ever realized you've been on the wrong side of your own story? Type awakening. If you've ever had a moment when everything you thought you knew suddenly shifted, because what Richard did next didn't just shock his board and his staff, it threatened the very empire he'd spent his life building. But before I tell you about Richard's decision, you need to know about the 3 people who were already working to destroy him. Because sometimes, the most dangerous enemies aren't strangers. They're the ones sitting at your table, smiling while they sharpen their knives. Mr. Harrington, you can't be serious. Richard's personal assistant, Vanessa, stared at him in disbelief. The schedule change he'd just requested was unprecedented. Cancel my meetings for the next 3 days, he repeated. All of them. But sir, the Tokyo investors can wait. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Harrington was stepping away from his empire. Not for a crisis, not for a strategic retreat, but to watch his daughter. What happened over those 3 days transformed everything. On day 1, Richard installed himself in his home office. Door cracked open, surveillance cameras redirected. Not to spy, to learn. At 9:17 a.m., Charlotte's physical therapist arrived. Richard had hired Dr. Abrams 3 years ago, the best in Connecticut, with a reputation for pushing patients to their limits. Remember, small movements. Dr. Abrams instructed Charlotte, her voice clinical. Don't strain. Charlotte nodded obediently, face blank as she performed the same exercises she'd done for years. Progress measured in millimeters. At 11:43 a.m., after the therapist left, Elijah appeared. Ready? He asked, poking his head into Charlotte's room. Charlotte's entire demeanor changed. Mom's working in the East Wing. We've got 40 minutes. Richard leaned closer to the monitor. I found something new, Elijah said, pulling a book from his backpack. It's about a girl who discovers she can talk to animals. Read it to me while I practice, Charlotte said, sliding from her wheelchair to the floor. What happened next stopped Richard's breath. Charlotte positioned herself on her stomach, then pushed up, attempting a modified push-up Dr. Abrams had deemed too advanced. She struggled, arms trembling. You've got this, Elijah encouraged, not helping, just believing. 3 more than yesterday, remember? Charlotte's face contorted with effort. 1 push-up, 2. Her arms gave out on the 3rd. That's okay, Elijah said. Tomorrow, you'll get 3. He opened the book and began reading, while Charlotte rested, then tried again. By day 2, Richard had questions. He found Dr. Abrams after Charlotte's session. How would you assess my daughter's progress over the past year? The therapist consulted her notes. Steady but minimal. Charlotte's condition means we must be cautious. And if we weren't cautious? Dr. Abrams blinked. Sir? Hypothetically, what might Charlotte achieve without restrictions? Well, with aggressive therapy, some patients show remarkable improvement, but the risk of setbacks, Thank you, Doctor. That afternoon, Richard watched Charlotte and Elijah in the garden. His security chief, Torres, stood beside him. "How long has this been going on?" Richard asked. "The friendship? About 7 months, sir." Torres shifted uncomfortably. "I would have reported it, but what?" "She's happier. Stronger, too. Watch." Below them, Elijah had set up a makeshift obstacle course with cushions and garden furniture. Charlotte navigated it partly in her wheelchair, partly by holding Elijah's arm. "They've been doing this 3 times a week," Torres explained. "Each time, she goes a little farther before needing the chair. And you kept this from me." Torres met his gaze directly. "With respect, sir, yes. Mrs. Jackson asked me not to interfere unless Charlotte was in danger. She never was." Richard realized the conspiracy of kindness had spread further than he imagined. His own security team, choosing his daughter's joy over his rules. On day 3, everything changed. Richard was reviewing security footage when he noticed something strange. Patricia Wells, his head of household staff for 15 years, entering Charlotte's room while she was with her tutor. Nothing unusual there, except Patricia didn't clean. She supervised. Richard rewound further footage. There it was again. Patricia entering Charlotte's room when empty, but leaving nothing, taking nothing. That evening, Richard called Miriam to his study. "Mrs. Jackson, does Patricia Wells have any reason to search my daughter's room?" Miriam's expression tightened. "So you've noticed." "Explain." 3 weeks ago, Charlotte's bracelet went missing, the one with the diamonds. Patricia suggested Elijah might have taken it. Richard's jaw clenched. "And did he?" "No, sir. Charlotte had left it in the pool house, but Patricia conducted a thorough search of our quarters before it was found." "Why wasn't I informed?" "Patricia said she'd handle it discreetly, to spare you the distress." Miriam hesitated. She also suggested it might be best if Elijah didn't come to work with me anymore. The pieces clicked into place. The whispers, the concerns, the sudden scrutiny. It wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated. "Thank you, Mrs. Jackson. That will be all." After she left, Richard made a call. "Torres, I need everything you have on Patricia Wells. Phone records, emails, bank statements, everything." "Sir?" "I think we have a snake in the house." The next morning, Richard summoned Patricia to his study. On his desk sat a folder. "15 years of loyal service," he began. "That's quite a record." Patricia smiled tightly. "I take pride in running your household efficiently, sir." "Yes, efficiency. Like how efficiently you've been reporting to Victor Grant about my daughter's activities." The color drained from Patricia's face. Richard opened the folder. 16 calls to Victor's private line in the past month. $30,000 deposited into your offshore account 3 weeks ago. And this. He pushed forward a printed email, instructing you to find something incriminating on the Jackson boy. "Mr. Harrington, I can explain." "No need. You're fired. You have 30 minutes to leave the property." As security escorted Patricia out, Richard watched from his window. One threat neutralized, but the bigger battle was just beginning. That afternoon, he found Charlotte and Elijah in the music room. Charlotte was at the piano, an instrument she'd abandoned after her diagnosis, while Elijah turned pages of sheet music. "Dad," Charlotte startled. "We were just playing Mozart," Richard finished, pointing to the sheet music. "Your mother's favorite." An awkward silence fell. "Elijah, may I speak with my daughter alone?" The boy nodded respectfully and headed for the door. "Actually," Richard called after him, "don't go far. I'd like to speak with you next." When they were alone, Charlotte's defenses rose. I know I should be practicing my therapy exercises, but… Charlotte. Richard interrupted gently. When's the last time you played piano? She blinked, surprised by the question. Before Mom died. And why did you stop? You said I needed to focus on getting better. The simple truth hit Richard like a physical blow. In his determination to fix her body, he'd caged her spirit. Play for me, he said, sitting beside her. Please. Hesitantly, Charlotte's fingers returned to the keys. The melody was imperfect, halting, but alive. Now tell me about Elijah, Richard said when she finished. The truth. For the first time in years, Charlotte spoke without filtering, without fear. She told him how Elijah challenged her, believed in her, never saw the wheelchair first. How he'd helped her stand for almost a minute last week. How they had a secret goal for her to walk across the garden by summer's end. He makes me brave, Dad, she said simply, like Mom did. Richard felt something crack inside him, the last of his fortress walls. I've made mistakes, Charlotte, he admitted. I thought I was protecting you, but I've been holding you back. Are you going to make Elijah leave? Her voice trembled. No. In fact, I'm going to do something that will shock a lot of people. Richard smiled, including Victor Grant. Comment if you think it's time. Richard fought back against the prejudice threatening his daughter's happiness. But Richard had no idea what forces he was about to unleash. Because Victor Grant wasn't just his neighbor and investor. He was the man who'd been waiting 15 years to destroy everything Richard had built. And now, Richard had just given him the perfect weapon. 3 months can change everything. The Connecticut summer bloomed hot and bright as Charlotte's progress accelerated beyond what any doctor had predicted. The wheelchair wasn't gone, but it wasn't her prison anymore either. 5 steps yesterday, 7 today, Dr. Rivera reported. Richard had fired Dr. Abrams and hired Dr. Rivera instead, a specialist who believed in pushing boundaries safely. And her pain levels? Richard asked. Manageable. Her core strength has doubled since May. Dr. Rivera smiled. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. What they were doing was breaking every rule in Richard's old playbook. Charlotte now had a comprehensive therapy program that included swimming, modified yoga, and daily walks with Elijah as her support. The mansion's east garden had been transformed into a rehabilitation course with ramps, rails, and rest points. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was Charlotte herself. The quiet, obedient girl was gone, replaced by someone who laughed loudly, argued passionately, and set her own goals. I want to stand on my own at the gala, she announced at breakfast, 3 weeks before the annual Harrington Foundation event. Richard looked up from his newspaper. Charlotte, that's in 21 days. I know exactly how long I have, she replied, determination hardening her voice. Elijah's helping me practice every day. Richard exchanged glances with Miriam, who now joined them for family meals, another broken barrier. If that's your goal, we'll make it happen, he said finally. What Richard didn't tell Charlotte was that the gala might not happen at all. The board was in revolt. You've gone too far, Victor had warned during their last meeting. First you fire Patricia, a loyal employee. Then you promote the maid to household manager. Now you're planning to showcase your daughter with the Jackson boy at our most public event? The optics are disastrous. The optics, Richard had replied coldly, are exactly what I'm counting on. Because Richard Harrington had made a decision that shocked his entire circle. He was done hiding, done pretending, done playing by rules designed to keep people like Miriam and Elijah in their place. The price was steep. 3 board members had threatened to resign. 2 major investors had pulled out. His stock had dropped 7% on rumors of erratic behavior and personal distractions. But Richard had something more valuable than stock points now. He had purpose. The night of the gala arrived with perfect weather and maximum tension. 500 of the wealthiest, most influential people in the Northeast gathered at the Harrington estate, curious about the rumors swirling around their host. Richard adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, remembering another gala 15 years ago, when he'd been the outsider, the newcomer, desperate to belong among the elite. How much he'd compromised to be accepted. How much of himself he'd buried. A knock at his door. Torres entered, face grim. "Sir, we have a situation. Victor Grant is here with the Sullivans." Richard's jaw tightened. The Sullivans owned the second-largest logistics company in North America, his chief competitors. "Where are they?" "East Terrace. And sir, they have reporters with them, from the Financial Times." So that was Victor's play. Not just a boardroom coup, a public execution. "Keep Charlotte and the Jacksons away from that terrace. I'll handle Victor." Richard moved through his crowded home, shaking hands, nodding at familiar faces. The whispers followed him. Something big was happening. Something unprecedented. He found Victor holding court among a group that included 2 board members and the Sullivans. A woman with a press badge lingered nearby. "Victor," Richard greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't aware you'd invited the press to my home." "Richard, I was just telling everyone about your innovative new household arrangement." Victor's smile was venomous. "Ms. Porter here is doing a piece on corporate leadership and personal choices." Fascinating angle. The trap was set. Anything Richard said next would become tomorrow's headline. "Ms. Porter," Richard turned to the reporter, "I'd be happy to give you an exclusive, but first, I have an announcement to make." The ballroom fell silent as Richard took the stage. Hundreds of eyes watched. Hundreds of ears listened. In the front row sat Charlotte in her wheelchair, Elijah standing supportively beside her. "For 15 years, Richard began, "I've stood on this stage and talked about numbers, profits, acquisitions, growth. Tonight, I want to talk about something different, something more valuable." He paused, scanning the crowd. Victor's smug face, the board member's apprehension, the reporter's pen poised over her notepad. "I want to talk about courage." Richard gestured toward Charlotte. "Many of you know my daughter was diagnosed with spinal stenosis at age 7. What you don't know is that for 3 years, I've been her biggest obstacle." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I thought I was protecting her by limiting her, by keeping her safe in a controlled environment. I was wrong." Richard's voice strengthened. 3 months ago, I witnessed something that changed everything. I saw my daughter laughing, truly laughing, for the first time since her mother died. Charlotte looked up, surprised. They hadn't rehearsed this. That laughter came because of one person. Someone who saw Charlotte, not her condition. Someone who believed in her potential when I only saw her limitations. Richard extended his hand. "Elijah, would you join me?" The murmurs grew louder as Elijah, clearly nervous, but standing tall, walked to the stage. "This young man taught me the most important business lesson of my career. That true value isn't created by walls and barriers. It's created by breaking them down." Richard placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Which is why tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Jackson Harrington Foundation, with an initial endowment of $75 million. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Victor's face darkened. This foundation will provide healthcare, education, and mentorship to children society has overlooked. Children who, like Elijah, have the potential to change lives if given the chance. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Polite applause from some, stunned silence from others. Richard wasn't finished. And to demonstrate what's possible when we believe in potential, I'd like to invite my daughter to join us. All eyes turned to Charlotte. This was the moment they'd practiced for weeks. But not like this. Not with hundreds watching. Charlotte took a deep breath, gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, and slowly, carefully, pushed herself to standing. The room collectively held its breath as Charlotte took one step, then another. Elijah moved to the edge of the stage, ready to help if needed, but letting her do this on her own. One painful step at a time, Charlotte walked across the floor. 7 steps, the most she'd ever taken unassisted. When she reached the stage steps, she faltered. For a terrible moment, it seemed she might fall. Then Elijah was there, offering his arm, not carrying her, not controlling her, just supporting her choice to keep going. Together, they climbed the steps to stand beside Richard. The silence broke into thunderous applause. But not from everyone. Victor Grant stood stone-faced, whispering urgently to the Sullivans. The reporter was scribbling frantically. As the applause continued, Richard leaned down to Charlotte. "I'm so proud of you." Her eyes shone. "I made it." "Yes, you did." Richard smiled, then grew serious. "But what comes next won't be easy. Are you ready for that?" Charlotte looked at Elijah, then back at her father. "We both are." What they couldn't know was how right she was. Because while the crowd applauded, Victor Grant was already executing the second phase of his plan. One designed to destroy not just Richard's company, but the Jacksons as well. Drop a comment if you believe in Charlotte's courage, but ask yourself, would you have the same courage if everything you'd built was about to come crashing down? Because by morning, the Harrington name would be splashed across every financial news outlet in America, and not in the way Richard had planned. Harrington heir apparent, CEO's daughter in inappropriate relationship with household staff. The headline screamed from Richard's tablet at 5:37 a.m. Not from some tabloid rag, but from the Financial Times, complete with photos of Charlotte and Elijah at the gala, their context twisted into something unrecognizable. The article quoted anonymous sources close to the family, claiming Richard had become mentally unstable following his wife's death, allowing inappropriate relationships to develop under his roof. It suggested the new foundation was hush money to cover potential legal issues. Most damning was a fabricated quote attributed to a family friend. "Everyone knows what's really happening between those children. It's being encouraged for reasons I can't fathom." Richard's phone exploded with notifications. Board members demanding emergency meetings. Investors threatening to pull out. Reporters requesting comments. By 7 a.m., Harrington Logistics stock had plummeted 23%. By 8 a.m., 3 major clients had suspended their contracts. By 9 a.m., the vultures had arrived. "Mr. Harrington, the Sullivans are offering to buy controlling interest at $42 per share," his CFO reported, voice tight with stress. "It's a hostile takeover." "That's 40% below market value," Richard replied, his calm at odds with the chaos around him. "Yes, sir. But with the stock in freefall and these allegations, they're not allegations. They're calculated lies." Richard's home office had transformed into a war room. Legal teams on one side, PR specialists on another, financial advisors running damage control. In the midst of it all, Richard remained eerily composed. Until Torres burst in. "Sir, there's a situation at the front gate. Reporters, protesters, at least 50 people. They're demanding statements about the exploitation happening in your home." Richard's composure cracked. Exploitation? "They're calling for Child Protective Services to investigate." The word hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about his company anymore. This was about Charlotte, about Elijah. "Where are they now?" "Safe room, with Mrs. Jackson." "But sir, Elijah's school called. There's been an incident." Richard's blood ran cold. What kind of incident? Some parents discovered Elijah is that boy from the news. They're demanding he be removed from the school. The machine Victor had set in motion was more vicious than Richard had anticipated. This wasn't business. This was personal destruction. Diane Chen, his CFO for 12 years, placed a hand on his arm. "Richard, we need to contain this. The board is convening at noon to vote on your temporary removal." "On what grounds?" "Mental instability affecting business judgment." Her eyes held genuine concern. "Victor has the votes." Richard looked around the room, at people who'd worked alongside him for years, now avoiding his gaze. The fortress he'd built was crumbling from within. "Get me Miriam," he said finally. When she arrived, her face told him everything. She'd seen the news. "Mrs. Jackson, I owe you an apology," Richard began. "I didn't anticipate—" "Yes, you did," she interrupted, surprising everyone. "You knew exactly what would happen when you put my son on that stage. You just didn't think it would be this bad." The room fell silent. No one interrupted Miriam Jackson anymore. "The question isn't what happened," she continued. "It's what happens next." Before Richard could answer, his phone rang. Charlotte's private line. "Dad, they're saying horrible things about Elijah online." Her voice trembled with rage, not fear. "They're saying I'm being... that we're... It's disgusting." "I know, sweetheart. We're handling it." "No. You're hiding us away like we've done something wrong." For the first time, Charlotte raised her voice to her father. "Elijah's being bullied because of me, because of our family name. Charlotte, I want to make a statement. I want to tell the truth." Richard froze. "Absolutely not. You're 10 years old. This isn't your battle." "It became my battle when they used my name to hurt my best friend." The line went dead. Charlotte had hung up on him. Another first. Richard turned back to the room. Decision made. "Clear everyone out except legal and PR. And get me everything we have on Victor Grant's finances for the last 5 years." "Sir?" Torres questioned. "Victor didn't orchestrate this overnight. This is personal, which means he's been planning it for years, and men like Victor always leave tracks." As the room cleared, Richard faced Miriam. "I won't ask you and Elijah to stay through this. I can arrange." "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Running teaches Elijah the wrong lesson." "And what's the right lesson?" "That when people try to destroy what matters to you, you don't hide. You fight." For the first time that day, Richard smiled. "Mrs. Jackson, I believe we finally understand each other." The next 4 hours became a masterclass in corporate warfare. Richard's team uncovered Victor's hidden agenda, a long-standing vendetta dating back to when Richard outbid him for a crucial acquisition 15 years ago. They found evidence of Victor shorting Harrington stock days before the gala, betting millions on its failure. Most damning, they discovered Victor's offshore account had paid the reporter $250,000 for the hit piece. But the board meeting couldn't wait. At noon sharp, Richard walked into the lion's den. 12 faces stared back at him, some apologetic, some determined, some openly hostile. Victor sat at the far end, barely containing his triumph. "Before we begin," Richard said, "I'd like to introduce someone." The boardroom doors opened. Elijah walked in, head high despite the fear in his eyes. Murmurs erupted. Victor's face darkened. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "This is highly inappropriate." "Inappropriate," Richard repeated. "That word keeps coming up today. I'd like Elijah to tell you what happened at his school this morning." The boy stepped forward, voice steady, despite his trembling hands. "3 kids cornered me in the bathroom. They said I was taking advantage of Charlotte, that her dad was paying my mom for—" He swallowed hard. "Things I don't even understand." The room fell uncomfortably silent. "They beat me up, called me names I won't repeat, said people like me should know our place." Richard placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Thank you, Elijah. You can go now." After the boy left, Richard faced the board. "That's the real-world consequence of what happened today. Not stock prices, not market share. A 10-year-old boy being assaulted because of lies published in a respected newspaper. While unfortunate," Victor cut in, "personal matters have no place." "I have evidence," Richard interrupted, "that Victor paid the reporter $250,000 to publish today's story. I have evidence he's been shorting our stock for weeks, positioning himself to profit from this exact scenario." The boardroom erupted. Victor's face went from triumphant to trapped in seconds. "That's absurd," he sputtered. "You can't prove—" Richard slid a folder across the table. Banking records, offshore transfers, recorded phone calls with the Sullivans planning this takeover 2 months ago. As the board members examined the evidence, Richard delivered the final blow. "Vote me out if you want. But know this, the moment you do, this evidence goes to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country." The vote to retain Richard was 11-1. Victor stormed out, legal consequences already looming. But the public battle had just begun. That evening, Richard found Charlotte in her room, furiously typing on her laptop. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Writing my statement." Her jaw was set in the same determination he saw in his own mirror. "I'm posting it tomorrow." "Charlotte, I heard what happened to Elijah at school." Her eyes flashed. "I'm not hiding anymore, Dad. Neither should you." Richard sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. The words were simple, powerful, true, written with a clarity that stunned him. "If I let you do this," he said carefully, "there's no going back. The whole world will be watching." "They already are," she replied. "At least this way, they'll hear the truth." As Richard left her room, his phone buzzed with a text from Torres. "Sir, you need to see this. Miriam Jackson's past is being leaked online." The war wasn't over. It was escalating. Have you ever faced a moment when standing up for what's right meant risking everything you've built? Because what Charlotte was about to do would either save the Harrington name or destroy it completely. And the secret from Miriam's past that was about to surface would test Richard's newfound convictions in ways he never imagined. Miriam Jackson, 8 years in prison for embezzlement. The headline exploded across social media at 6 a.m. Victor's final revenge, a truth buried so deep even Richard's investigators had missed it. Miriam sat in Richard's study, hands folded in her lap, dignity intact, despite the storm raging around her. "I was 22, she said quietly. Working as a bank teller, my boyfriend convinced me to help him access accounts. Richard remained silent, letting her speak. I served my time, changed my name legally after release, built a new life. Her eyes met his. I never lied on my application. You never asked about criminal history. And Elijah's father? Not the boyfriend. I met Elijah's father after prison. He died when Elijah was 3. Richard nodded slowly. Why didn't you tell me when this all started? Would it have mattered? Would you have put an ex-con's son on stage with your daughter? The question hung between them, the final test of Richard's transformation. Before he could answer, Torres burst in. Sir, you need to see this. He handed Richard a tablet. On the screen was a video going viral. Charlotte, sitting in her wheelchair, looking directly at the camera. My name is Charlotte Harrington, she began. You've been reading lies about me, about my friend Elijah, and about our families. I'm here to tell you the truth. Richard's heart stopped. She'd posted it without telling him. 3 months ago, I could barely stand. Today, I can walk 7 steps on my own. Not because of expensive doctors or my father's money, but because of Elijah Jackson. The video cut to footage from their therapy sessions. Elijah encouraging Charlotte, celebrating each tiny victory, never once treating her like she was broken. Elijah never saw my wheelchair. He saw me. And for the first time since my mom died, I didn't feel invisible anymore. Charlotte's voice grew stronger. Some people think our friendship is wrong because his mom works for my dad, because his skin is a different color than mine, because we come from different worlds. She leaned closer to the camera. Those people are the reason I'm making this video. The video had 2.7 million views in just 3 hours. Charlotte's truth was trending nationwide. Richard looked up from the tablet, meeting Miriam's anxious gaze. My daughter just changed the game, he said. Now it's our turn. Within the hour, Richard had assembled his team, not just executives and lawyers this time, but Miriam, Elijah, Charlotte, Dr. Rivera, even Torres. We've been playing defense, Richard told them. That ends today. The plan they crafted wasn't just about saving a company. It was about redefining a legacy. At noon, Richard called a press conference, not from a sterile corporate boardroom, but from his home. The same home where Charlotte had first laughed on Elijah's back. As cameras rolled, Richard stood with Miriam beside him, a clear statement before he spoke a single word. Yesterday, the world learned that Miriam Jackson spent 8 years in prison when she was barely more than a teenager. What they didn't hear was that she's spent the 15 years since then rebuilding her life, raising an extraordinary son, and becoming someone I'm proud to call not just an employee, but a friend. Miriam's composure never wavered as cameras flashed. I believe in second chances, Richard continued. I believe in redemption, and I believe in judging people by who they are today, not by their worst mistake. He turned to face Miriam directly, which is why I'm asking Miriam Jackson to serve as the executive director of the Jackson Harrington Foundation, with full authority to build a program that gives others the second chance she earned. Gasps from the press corps. This wasn't damage control. It was doubling down. As for the allegations regarding our children, Richard's voice hardened. They reveal more about the accusers than the accused. They reveal minds so poisoned by prejudice that they can't recognize simple human kindness when they see it. The cameras panned to Charlotte and Elijah, sitting side by side on a nearby couch. My daughter posted a video this morning. If you haven't seen it yet, you will. It shows the truth Victor Grant tried to destroy. That friendship transcends boundaries we create to separate ourselves from each other. Richard's voice softened. 3 months ago, I came home early from a business trip. I saw my daughter laughing as she hadn't laughed in years. That laughter terrified me, because it meant I'd been wrong. About her limitations, about what she needed, about who belonged in our lives. He looked directly into the camera. To every parent watching, don't make my mistake. Don't build fortresses around your children that become their prisons. The press conference exploded with questions, but Richard wasn't finished. One last thing. This morning, I filed a $780 million defamation lawsuit against Victor Grant and the Financial Times. Every penny awarded will go to the foundation. The aftermath was seismic. Charlotte's truth spawned thousands of similar videos, children and adults sharing stories of unexpected friendships that changed their lives. The foundation received over 10,000 applications in its first week. Harrington Logistics stock recovered, then surged as new investors aligned with Richard's vision. 3 board members resigned, replaced by leaders who reflected the diversity Richard now championed. Victor Grant faced criminal charges for market manipulation. The Sullivans' takeover attempt collapsed when their own investors questioned their association with him. But the real victory came 6 weeks later, in the Harrington garden. "Ready?" Elijah asked, standing at one end of the stone path. Charlotte nodded, gripping her walking poles. Richard and Miriam watched from nearby benches, close enough to help, far enough to let the children succeed or fail on their own. "Remember," Elijah coached, "small steps. I'm right here." Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3. By the 7th step, her arms trembled with effort. This was her usual limit. "You can do it," Elijah encouraged. "Just 3 more than yesterday." 8 steps, 9, 10. When she reached Elijah, both children erupted in cheers. Richard found himself wiping away tears, Miriam's hand squeezing his shoulder in shared triumph. "Mr. Harrington," she said quietly, "I never answered your question from that first day about whether I'd have put an ex-con's son on stage with your daughter." Richard turned to her. "And?" "I wouldn't have," she admitted. "I'd have been too afraid of exactly what happened, which is why what you did matters so much." "What we did," he corrected. "All of us." As summer faded to fall, the Harrington estate transformed. The silence was gone, replaced by the sounds of children, not just Charlotte and Elijah, but dozens of children from the foundation's first programs, filling the once empty rooms with noise and life. The fortress had become a sanctuary of a different kind. One evening, Richard found Charlotte and Elijah in the music room. She was playing piano, really playing now, with confidence, while he turned pages. "Dad," Charlotte called, "come listen to what we figured out." As Richard sat beside them, watching his daughter's fingers dance across keys that had been silent for years, he realized the true measure of wealth wasn't in the empire he'd built. It was in the sound of his child's laughter. It was in the courage to stand against prejudice. It was in the family they'd created, not by blood, but by choice. Because sometimes, the greatest act of power isn't building walls to keep people out. It's having the courage to tear them down. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe to hear more stories of courage that change lives. And tell me in the comments, what walls have you torn down in your own life that set someone free? Because the truth is, we all have the power to be like Richard, like Charlotte, like Elijah and Miriam. We all have the power to look at the boundaries society creates and say, not in my house, not in my heart, not in my life. And that might be the most valuable legacy any of us can leave.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.